Valentine's Day was supposed to be about roses. About whispered confessions and chocolate hearts wrapped in red foil. About young love and nervous hands and the kind of hope that only February the 14th can carry. But for one 18-year-old girl living in a crumbling apartment on the south side of Chicago, Valentine's Day had nothing to do with love. At exactly 11:47 that night, while red balloons floated above candlelit tables in restaurants across the city, while couples slow danced under string lights and teenagers exchanged handwritten notes in dorm rooms, a girl named Isabella Cruz lay curled on the cold linoleum floor of her tiny bedroom. Her lip was split. Her left eye was swollen shut. Her phone screen, cracked and dim, still displayed the last message she had received that evening. It read, and I quote, "Nobody will ever love you. Just disappear already." She had been crying for 3 hours straight. The kind of crying that doesn't make noise anymore. The kind where your body just shakes and your lungs forget how to work and you wonder, genuinely wonder, if the world would even notice your absence. Her little brother Mateo was asleep in the next room. He was only 9. He still believed his big sister was the strongest person alive. He still drew pictures of her as a superhero. He still crawled into her bed during thunderstorms because she made him feel safe. But Isabella didn't feel strong. She didn't feel like a superhero. She felt like she was drowning in a life that had decided, long ago, that she wasn't worth saving. And then, just before midnight, something happened that no doctor, no scientist, no philosopher could ever explain. Her heart stopped. For exactly 43 seconds, Isabella Cruz was clinically dead on that cold bedroom floor, alone, unnoticed, unmourned. But when her heart started again, when her lungs filled with air and her fingers twitched against the cracked tile, the girl who opened her eyes was not the same girl who had closed them. The body was the same. The bruises were the same. The cracked phone, the tear-streaked pillow, the faint smell of her mother's leftover coffee drifting in from the kitchen. All the same. But the mind behind those dark brown eyes was entirely different. Because somewhere between that last breath and the first echo of February the 15th, a woman who had once been feared across 3 states, a woman known in whispered conversations and sealed federal files as La Reina Negra, the Black Queen, opened her eyes inside that broken girl's body. And she was not confused. She was not afraid. She assessed the room in under 4 seconds. Door, 6 feet to the left, hollow core, easy to breach. Window, single pane, 2nd floor, survivable drop. No weapons visible. No immediate threats. Her hands were small, young, unfamiliar, but her instincts were razor-sharp, honed by decades of survival in a world where hesitation meant death. She sat up slowly. She looked at the cracked mirror leaning against the wall. A teenage girl stared back at her. Thin, fragile, dark circles under swollen eyes. But the gaze looking out from that young face was something else entirely. It was cold. It was calculating. It was the gaze of a woman who had once sat at the head of a table surrounded by men twice her size and made them lower their eyes first. She whispered one word to herself that night. One single word that carried the weight of an entire lifetime she shouldn't have been able to remember. She said, "Again." And that single syllable changed everything. Before we go any deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Whether you're in New York, Lagos, London, Manila, or somewhere we've never even heard of, drop your location below. And if you're new here, click on that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for what happens next. Now, I need you to sit with some questions for a moment. Because this story raises the kind of questions that don't have easy answers. What really happened that night on that bedroom floor? How does a bullied, broken teenager wake up with the mind of a criminal mastermind who died decades ago in a completely different city? Was it a miracle? Was it a curse? Was it some kind of cosmic error? A soul slipping through the cracks of whatever system governs life and death? And why, of all the 365 days in the year, did it happen on Valentine's Day? The day of love. The day of hearts and flowers and promises. Was the universe being poetic? Or was it being cruel? Because here's the thing that kept me awake when I first heard this story. If power returns to someone who once ruled through fear, If the memories of blood and betrayal and dominance flood back into a mind that now lives inside the body of a teenager with a 9-year-old brother who draws her as a superhero, what happens next? Does she choose love this time? Does she use that second chance to become something better? Or does she burn the world down all over again? Hold those questions. Because the answer is more complicated than you think. To understand what Isabella became, you first have to understand what she was. And to understand the woman who woke up inside her, you have to go back much further than one Valentine's Day in Chicago. Isabella Cruz was born in a hospital she could never afford to return to. Her father, Miguel, was a maintenance worker at a downtown office building. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice, who fixed leaky faucets on weekends for elderly neighbors and never charged them a dime, who read bedtime stories to Isabella every single night until the night he couldn't anymore. He died when Isabella was 11. Pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came in March. He was gone by August. 5 months. That's all the universe gave them to say goodbye. Isabella's mother, Dolores, was a woman made of quiet steel. The kind of woman who cries in the shower so her children never see it. After Miguel died, Dolores picked up a second shift at the diner where she worked. Then a third. She was gone before the sun came up and didn't return until long after it set. She left notes on the kitchen counter every morning. Breakfast is in the fridge. Make sure Mateo brushes his teeth. I love you more than the moon. Isabella kept every single one of those notes in a showbox under her bed. Every one. But while Dolores worked herself to the bone, Isabella was left to navigate the specific kind of cruelty that teenagers are uniquely capable of. High school is a strange ecosystem. It rewards confidence and punishes vulnerability with surgical precision. And Isabella, quiet, shy, still grieving a father she would never stop missing, was vulnerable in ways that made her a target. It started small. Whispers in the hallway. A notebook knocked off her desk. Laughter that stopped the moment she turned around. The kind of cruelty that's hard to report because individually, each incident seems like nothing. But collectively, over weeks and months and years, it becomes a weight that presses down on your chest until you forget what it feels like to breathe without effort. By junior year, it had escalated. A group of girls led by someone named Brianna Hayes had made Isabella their primary project. Brianna was the kind of popular that comes with an entourage and an audience. She had over 12,000 followers on social media, a car her parents bought her for her 16th birthday, and the casual confidence of someone who has never once doubted her place in the world. She also had a mean streak that she disguised as humor. The videos started appearing online in October. Clips of Isabella in the cafeteria, eating alone, edited with sad music and laughing emojis. Screenshots of messages Isabella had sent to a boy she liked, shared publicly with the caption, "Imagine thinking you had a chance." A slow, methodical campaign of humiliation designed not to destroy Isabella all at once, but to chip away at her piece by piece until there was nothing left. And then came Valentine's Day, the cruelest prank of all. Someone sent Isabella a bouquet of red roses with a card that read, "From your secret admirer. Meet me at the gymnasium at 6. Isabella almost didn't go. She almost threw the flowers away. But there was a part of her, a small and stubborn part that still believed the world had kindness in it. That put on the one nice dress she owned and walked to the school gymnasium at 6 o'clock on Valentine's evening. When she opened the doors, the gymnasium was dark. Then the lights came on, and there were 30 students standing in a circle, phones raised, recording. A banner hung from the basketball hoop. It read, "Happy Valentine's Day to the girl nobody wants." The laughter hit her like a physical blow. She could feel it in her chest, in her stomach, in the backs of her knees. Brianna was at the center, grinning, phone perfectly angled for maximum engagement. Isabella didn't cry. Not there. She turned around and walked out. She walked home in the February cold, in her one nice dress, past couples holding hands and restaurants with candlelit windows, and she didn't cry until she was on her bedroom floor with the door locked and the lights off. That was the girl. Now let me tell you about the woman. Because the soul that woke up inside Isabella's body on February the 15th carried memories that spanned decades and continents. In the 1970s, In a crumbling neighborhood in Miami that smelled of salt air and motor oil, a girl named Valentina Moretti grew up in a household where survival was the only curriculum. Her father ran numbers for a local crew. Her mother cleaned houses for families who never learned her name. Valentina was sharp. Not just smart, but sharp in the way that a blade is sharp, with an edge that cut through pretense and saw the world exactly as it was. By the time she was 20, she had already identified the fundamental truth of the world she lived in. Power wasn't given. It was taken. And the people who had it would never share it unless they were forced to. She started small. Running messages. Managing books. Noticing inefficiencies that the men around her were too proud or too lazy to see. By 25, she had restructured the supply chain of one of Miami's most prominent operations and doubled its revenue in 18 months. The men at the top didn't like it. A woman, in their world, was decoration. She was not supposed to understand logistics and leverage. But Valentina understood something they didn't. She understood loyalty. She understood that the men at the bottom of the ladder, the drivers and the lookouts and the warehouse workers, were underpaid, disrespected, and desperate for someone to treat them like human beings. She treated them like human beings. She remembered their children's names. She paid for their mother's medications. She showed up to their family barbecues with gifts and genuine interest. And in return, they gave her something more valuable than money. They gave her their absolute, unwavering loyalty. By 30, Valentina Moretti controlled territory that stretched from Miami to Atlanta to New Orleans. 3 states. Hundreds of people. Millions of dollars. She was known as La Reina Negra, not because of cruelty, but because of the darkness she moved through. She operated in shadows. She never appeared in photographs. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. When Valentina Moretti walked into a room, the temperature dropped. Not because people feared what she would do, but because they feared what she could do and hadn't yet. She was, by every measure, one of the most powerful women in the American underworld. And she had one rule that she never, ever broke. Family above all. Everything else was negotiable. Territory, money, alliances, all of it could be rearranged. But family was sacred. It was the one line she drew in permanent ink. But here's what Valentina learned too late. The people closest to you are the ones with the sharpest knives. His name was Dominic Salerno. He had been with her since the early days. He was charming, intelligent, and patient. He had the kind of face that made you want to trust him and the kind of mind that made trusting him a fatal mistake. Valentina loved him. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way that powerful people love. In the spaces between decisions. In the moments when the armor came off and the woman underneath was just a woman who wanted someone to see her. Dominic saw her. And he used what he saw. On a warm evening in September of 1994, Valentina sat down to dinner at her private residence in Coral Gables. Dominic had prepared the meal himself. He poured her a glass of red wine, Barolo, her favorite. They talked about the future. About stepping back. About a life that didn't require looking over their shoulders. She drank the wine. 30 minutes later, her vision blurred. Her hands went numb. She looked across the table at Dominic, and in his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before. Relief. The kind of relief a man feels when a gamble he's been planning for years finally pays off. She tried to speak. She tried to reach for the phone, for the gun in the drawer behind her, for anything. But her body was already shutting down. The last thing Valentina Moretti saw before everything went black was Dominic standing up, straightening his tie, and walking out of the room without looking back. She died at the table. Alone. Surrounded by the empire she had built with her bare hands, betrayed by the one person she had allowed past her defenses. And then nothing. For years, decades, there was nothing. No light, no tunnel, no angels, no fire. Just absence. Until February the 15th, when a pair of young, swollen eyes opened on a cold bedroom floor in Chicago, and the absence ended. Now imagine that. Imagine waking up and knowing 2 lifetimes at once. Imagine feeling the bruises on your face and simultaneously remembering the burn of a poisoned wine sliding down your throat. Imagine looking in a mirror and seeing a stranger's face but knowing, with absolute certainty, that you have lived before. That you have killed before. That you have loved and lost and built and burned and died before. And imagine realizing, in that same moment, that you have been given something impossible. A second chance. Not to reclaim an empire. Not to settle old scores. But to protect a 9-year-old boy sleeping in the next room who still thinks you're a superhero. That was the reality Isabella woke up to. Or rather, that was the reality Valentina woke up to. Wearing Isabella's skin, carrying Isabella's pain. But armed with 40 years of experience in a world that did not forgive weakness. The first thing she did was clean the blood from her lip. She did it slowly, methodically, the way she used to clean a wound after a negotiation went wrong. She looked at her reflection and made a decision that would define everything that followed. She would not waste this body. She would not waste this chance. She would not become a victim again. Not in this life. Not in any life. But she also made a second decision. One that surprised even her. She would not become a monster again either. Mateo deserved better than that. The next morning, Isabella walked into the kitchen where Dolores had left the usual note on the counter. Oatmeal is on the stove. Don't forget Mateo's inhaler. I love you more than the moon. Isabella, or the woman now living inside her, stood there holding that note for a long time. In her previous life, no one had ever left her notes like this. No one had ever told her they loved her more than the moon. She folded the note carefully and placed it in the showbox under the bed with all the others. Then she made Mateo breakfast, packed his inhaler in his backpack, walked him to the bus stop, and watched the yellow bus pull away until it disappeared around the corner. When she turned around, her eyes were different. The softness was gone. The calculation was back. She had work to do. She went back to school that Monday. The hallways hadn't changed. The same fluorescent lights. The same scuffed lockers. The same clusters of teenagers performing confidence for each other like actors in a play none of them had auditioned for. Brianna was there, of course, surrounded by her usual circle, already looking at Isabella with the casual cruelty of someone selecting their next target. Isabella walked past them without a word. No tears. No flinching. No lowered eyes. She walked with a posture that didn't belong to an 18-year-old. Straight spine. Level gaze. Measured steps. The kind of walk that people who have survived real danger develop without trying. It was subtle, but Brianna noticed it. Something had shifted, and she couldn't quite name what it was, but it unsettled her. So she pushed harder. Nice dress yesterday, Isabella, Brianna said loudly in the hallway, drawing giggles from her friends. Did your secret admirer ever show up? The laughter rolled through the corridor like a wave. But Isabella stopped. She didn't turn around dramatically. She didn't shout. She simply paused, looked over her shoulder, and said, in a voice that was quiet enough that Brianna had to lean in to hear it. You should be more careful about what you put online, Brianna. Screenshots last forever. Especially the ones your father's business partners wouldn't want to see. The color drained from Brianna's face so fast it was almost comical. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Isabella turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had spent 3 hours the previous night on the family computer, using skills from a lifetime ago to do what she had always done best, gather information. Valentina Moretti had never needed weapons. Information was always the most dangerous thing in any room. And in the age of the internet, in a world where teenagers documented every moment of their lives online, information was everywhere. Within 2 weeks, the bullying stopped. Not gradually. Abruptly. The videos disappeared from social media. The whispered jokes in the cafeteria dried up. Brianna Hayes, who had once moved through the school like she owned it, began avoiding Isabella's gaze entirely. No one knew exactly what had happened. There were rumors, of course. Someone said Isabella had hired a lawyer. Someone else said she had contacted the school board with evidence of systematic harassment. A third person swore she had seen Isabella talking to a man in a dark suit outside the school. But that one was probably made up. The truth was simpler and more unsettling. Isabella had done what Valentina had always done. She had identified pressure points and applied precise, measured force. Not enough to destroy. Just enough to control. But stopping bullies was the easy part. What came next was harder. Because the universe, it seemed, was not done testing her. 3 weeks after Valentine's Day, Isabella came home to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and tears running silently down her face. Dolores didn't cry in front of her children. She never had. Not when Miguel died. Not when the car broke down. Not when the landlord raised the rent for the 3rd time in 2 years. But she was crying now, and that scared Isabella more than anything she had ever faced in either of her lifetimes. "Mom," she said carefully, sitting down across from her. Dolores pushed the papers across the table. They were from a financial services company Isabella had never heard of. The language was dense, full of legal jargon and numbers, but the message was clear. Dolores had taken out a loan 18 months ago to cover Mateo's medical bills, and the terms, which had seemed manageable at the time, had ballooned into something predatory. The interest rate had tripled. The balance owed was now more than Dolores made in an entire year. And the company was threatening to garnish her wages and put a lien on the apartment. Isabella read every word on those pages. And as she did, something cold and familiar settled into her chest. This wasn't a regular lending company. The terms were designed to trap, not to help. The escalation clauses were buried in fine print that would have required a law degree to decode. This was the kind of operation Valentina had seen 100 times in her previous life. Legal on the surface, predatory underneath, and extraordinarily profitable for the people at the top. She asked her mother one question. "Who referred you to this company?" Dolores wiped her eyes and said, "A man came to the diner. He was very polite. He said he helped families like ours. He gave me his card." Isabella took the business card from her mother's trembling hand. The name on it meant nothing to her. But the company logo did. It was a stylized black crown. And in the deep recesses of Valentina's memory, a crown just like that had once hung above the entrance to a nightclub in Miami. A nightclub owned by Dominic Salerno. Let me pause here for a moment. Because I need you to understand the weight of what just happened. The man who murdered Valentina Moretti, the man who poisoned her wine and watched her die and walked away without looking back, hadn't just disappeared into comfortable retirement. He had evolved. He had taken the skills and connections he acquired during his years at Valentina's side and built something new. Something that operated in daylight, behind corporate letterheads and polished marketing materials and men in nice suits who visited diners and offered help to struggling single mothers. He had gone legitimate, at least on the surface. But underneath, the machinery was the same. Exploitation. Control. Profit from other people's desperation. And somehow, through some impossible thread of fate or coincidence or cosmic justice, his operation had reached across decades and state lines to wrap its fingers around the throat of the one family that now housed the soul of the woman he had murdered. If this story has your heart racing right now, drop a comment that says "I'm still watching." Let's see who's truly following this all the way to the end. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table long after her mother and Mateo had gone to bed, and she worked. The family computer was old and slow, but it was enough. She started pulling threads. The lending company was a subsidiary of a holding group. The holding group was registered in Delaware, as they almost always are, because Delaware asks very few questions. The holding group had connections to half a dozen other entities, some financial, some real estate, some that existed only on paper. And at the center of it all, insulated by layers of corporate structure and legal distance, was a name she recognized. Not Dominic Salerno. He was too smart to put his own name on anything. But a name she remembered from the old days. A lieutenant. A loyal dog who had once fetched coffee for Valentina and who had, she now understood, been secretly working for Dominic the entire time. Over the following weeks, Isabella began doing something she hadn't done in decades. She reached out. Carefully, slowly, through channels that most people don't know exist. Encrypted messaging platforms. Dark web forums where the old rules still applied. She didn't use Valentina's name. She didn't need to. She used codes and phrases that only people from that era would recognize. verbal handshakes that had been established 30 years ago and never formally retired. And one by one, they responded. Old allies. Former associates. People who had mourned La Reina Negra and who had spent the intervening decades watching Dominic Salerno profit from her death. Not all of them were willing to help. Some had moved on. Some were afraid. But enough of them answered that Isabella began assembling something she hadn't had since her previous life ended. A network. But this time, it was different. In her previous life, Valentina's network was built on fear and mutual profit. This time, Isabella built it on something else. She built it on a shared sense of justice. Because she wasn't trying to reclaim territory or rebuild an empire. She was trying to protect a woman who left love notes on the kitchen counter and a 9-year-old boy with an inhaler and a sketchbook full of superhero drawings. That purpose, that clarity, attracted people in ways that raw power never had. Meanwhile, at home, things were getting harder. The lending company's pressure was increasing. Letters arrived daily, each one more threatening than the last. A man in a dark suit appeared at Dolores's diner and asked to speak with her, politely, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Dolores came home that night shaking. Isabella sat with her on the couch and held her hand and said, "Mom, I'm going to fix this. I need you to trust me." Dolores looked at her daughter, and something in Isabella's voice made her pause. It wasn't the voice of an 18-year-old. It was the voice of someone much older. Someone who had made promises like this before and kept them. Dolores didn't ask questions. She just nodded. And for the first time in months, she slept through the night. 3 months after Valentine's Day. Spring had arrived in Chicago, tentative and fragile, the way it always does in that city, as if the season itself isn't sure it's welcome yet. The trees along Isabella's street were just beginning to show green. Mateo had started playing baseball in the park after school, and Isabella made a point of being there for every game, sitting on the rusted bleachers with a water bottle and a bag of orange slices, cheering louder than anyone else. She was learning, in those moments, what it felt like to be present. In her previous life, Valentina had always been calculating, always 3 moves ahead, always watching for the knife she knew was coming. But sitting on those bleachers, watching a 9-year-old boy swing at a ball and miss and laugh about it, she felt something she hadn't felt in either lifetime. Peace. And it terrified her. Because she knew it couldn't last. Not yet. Not while Dominic Salerno's machine was still grinding. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Valentina's old contacts, a woman named Patricia who had once been the best forensic accountant in the Miami underworld before going straight and working for a non-profit, agreed to examine the lending company's financial records. What Patricia found was staggering. The company wasn't just predatory. It was actively laundering money through its loan portfolios, inflating balances, creating phantom borrowers, cycling dirty money through thousands of small transactions that individually looked routine but collectively represented millions of dollars in criminal proceeds. More importantly, Patricia found a pattern. The company's operations weren't random. They targeted specific communities, specific demographics. Single mothers, immigrants, people with limited English proficiency, people who worked multiple jobs and didn't have the time or resources to read fine print or hire lawyers. People like Dolores. Isabella sat with Patricia's report for an entire night. She read it 3 times. And when she was done, she faced a choice that would define everything. In her previous life, Valentina would have used this information as leverage. She would have approached Dominic privately, presented the evidence, and negotiated. Territory for silence. Power for cooperation. That was the old way. The efficient way. The way that kept empires running and everybody's hands dirty. But Isabella looked at the showbox under her bed. The one filled with her mother's notes. "I love you more than the moon." She looked at Mateo's drawings on the refrigerator, the ones where she had a cape and could fly. And she made a different choice. She contacted a journalist. Not a famous one. Not someone from a major network. She contacted a young reporter at a mid-sized Chicago newspaper who had been quietly investigating predatory lending in the area for over a year, but who lacked the kind of inside documentation that would make the story undeniable. Isabella provided that documentation. All of it. Anonymously, through secure channels, with enough detail to verify independently but without any trail leading back to the family. She also contacted the FBI. Not directly, of course. Through intermediaries. Through lawyers she had connected with using Valentina's old network. Lawyers who operated at the intersection of the legal world and the world beneath it. Who knew how to present information to federal agencies in a way that guaranteed action. What happened next took 6 months. Federal investigations don't move quickly. Journalism takes time when the stakes are high and the targets have lawyers. Isabella spent those 6 months doing something extraordinarily difficult for a woman who had once controlled an empire. She waited. She went to school. She helped Matteo with his homework. She worked a part-time job at a bookstore to help with bills. She sat on those bleachers every Thursday and Saturday and cheered for a little boy who was getting better at hitting the ball. She was, to anyone watching, an unremarkable 18-year-old girl taking care of her family. But beneath the surface, the machinery she had set in motion was turning. Slowly, deliberately, inevitably. During those months, her mother noticed the change. Of course she did. Dolores was exhausted and overworked, but she wasn't blind. One night in June, after Matteo had gone to bed, Dolores sat down next to Isabella on the couch and said something that stopped the woman inside the girl completely still. "You're different, Bella," she said quietly. "Ever since Valentine's Day. You walk different. You talk different. Sometimes I look at you and I see your father's eyes. But then you say something and you sound like someone I've never met." Isabella's throat tightened. In that moment, the two lifetimes inside her collided with a force that nearly broke her composure. She wanted to tell her mother everything. She wanted to say, "I'm not just your daughter. I'm also someone else, someone who lived and died and was given a chance to come back. And I came back here because this is where I was needed." But she couldn't say that. Because it would sound insane. And because it might frighten the one person in this world who loved her unconditionally. So instead, she said, "I just decided I'm done being afraid, Mom. That's all." Dolores studied her for a long moment. Then she pulled Isabella into a hug and whispered, "Whatever happened to you, whatever changed, I'm glad. Because the girl I was watching disappear is back. And she's stronger than she's ever been." They held each other for a long time that night. And in the quiet of that embrace, Valentina Moretti, the woman who had once ruled 3 states through fear and strategy, cried for the first time in either of her lives. Not from pain. Not from anger. From the overwhelming, unfamiliar, terrifying experience of being loved without conditions. October. 8 months after Valentine's Day. The story broke on a Wednesday. The newspaper published a 4-part investigative series detailing the lending company's predatory practices, its connections to organized crime, and the systematic targeting of vulnerable communities across the Midwest. The series named names. It included documents. It featured interviews with dozens of victims, Dolores among them, though she was identified only by her first initial, who described the devastating impact of loans designed to trap rather than help. 2 days after publication, the FBI executed simultaneous raids on the lending company's offices in 3 states. 14 arrests were made on the first day. 23 more followed over the next 2 weeks. The charges ranged from wire fraud to money laundering to racketeering. And at the center of it all, finally exposed after decades of insulation, was a 71-year-old man living in a gated community in Naples, Florida. Dominic Salerno. He was arrested at his home on a Thursday morning. The footage, captured by a news helicopter, showed federal agents escorting him across his manicured lawn in handcuffs while his neighbors watched from behind their curtains. He was wearing a bathrobe and slippers. He looked, for the first time in his life, small. Isabella watched the footage on the bookstore's break room television. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She stood very still and watched the man who had murdered her in another life shuffle across a lawn he could no longer afford, and she felt something she didn't expect. Emptiness. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Just the hollow quiet that comes when something you've carried for a very long time is finally set down. But the story doesn't end there. Because Dominic Salerno, even in handcuffs, was not finished. He had one card left to play, and he played it on the day before his arraignment. Through his lawyer, he requested a private meeting with an individual he described only as the girl from Chicago. His lawyer claimed he wanted to discuss a plea arrangement that would involve returning funds to defrauded borrowers, including Dolores Cruz. The FBI, intrigued by his willingness to cooperate, facilitated the meeting under controlled conditions. Isabella agreed to go. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell Mateo. She took a bus to the federal facility where Dominic was being held, walked through security, and sat down across a metal table from the man who had poured her a glass of poisoned wine in another lifetime. He had aged. His hair was white and thin. His hands, the same hands that had straightened his tie as he watched her die, now trembled slightly against the tabletop. But his eyes were the same. Dark, intelligent, and utterly without remorse. They sat in silence for nearly a full minute. Then Dominic spoke. "I knew it was you," he said quietly. The moment the investigation started, the way it was structured, the patience, the precision. Nobody else moves like that. Nobody else thinks like that. I spent 30 years looking over my shoulder for you, and you came back as a teenager. Isabella said nothing. She let the silence work for her the way Valentina always had. "How?" he asked. "How is this possible?" "Does it matter?" she replied. He leaned forward, studying her face with an intensity that would have frightened the old Isabella. "You could have killed me," he said. "You had the resources. You had the contacts. I know you rebuilt parts of the network. You could have handled this the old way." "Yes," she said simply. "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" And this is the moment that separates who Valentina was from who Isabella chose to become. She looked at Dominic Salerno, the man who had taken everything from her, who had stolen her life and built his fortune on her corpse, and she said 7 words that carried the weight of 2 lifetimes. "Because my brother deserves a sister, not a monster." Dominic stared at her. For the first time in their shared history, across both of her lifetimes, she saw something crack behind his eyes. Not guilt. Exactly. People like Dominic don't feel guilt the way the rest of us do. But recognition. He recognized that she had done something he never could. She had chosen to be more than what her circumstances demanded. She had chosen restraint over revenge. Love over power. And in doing so, she had beaten him more completely than any bullet or blade ever could. He leaned back in his chair and said nothing more. The meeting was over. Dominic Salerno pleaded guilty 3 months later. He was sentenced to 27 years in federal prison. He would die there, though nobody knew that yet. The lending company was dismantled. Restitution was ordered for over 4,000 victims across the Midwest. Dolores Cruz's debt was wiped clean. Every cent of it. Gone. On the day the restitution letter arrived, Dolores held it in both hands and cried the way she had cried at the kitchen table months earlier. But this time the tears were different. These were the tears of a woman who had been drowning and suddenly, impossibly, felt solid ground beneath her feet. Mateo, not understanding the details but understanding his mother's tears, climbed into her lap and said, "It's okay, Mom. Bella fixed it. Bella always fixes everything." Isabella stood in the kitchen doorway watching them and felt the 2 lives inside her finally, quietly, settle into something like peace. 1 year after Valentine's Day, February the 15th. Isabella sat on the fire escape outside her bedroom window as the city hummed below her. The air was cold, the way February air in Chicago always is, sharp and honest and unforgiving. She held a cup of coffee in both hands and watched the sun come up over the rooftops. She was 19 now. She had been accepted to a community college where she was studying criminal justice. Her plan, built carefully over the previous months, was to eventually attend law school and specialize in consumer protection. She wanted to build something that would outlast her. Not an empire. Not a network. A system. A legal framework that would protect people like her mother from the kind of predatory machinery that fed on desperation. She had already started. Using contacts from Valentina's old network, people who had gone legitimate over the years and who owed their careers to the queen who had once given them a chance, She had established a small consulting firm that helped families identify and escape predatory financial arrangements. The firm operated pro bono. It had 3 employees, 2 of whom were former underworld associates who now channeled their considerable talents into forensic accounting and legal research. Isabella called the firm Cruz Security Solutions. Not because it sounded impressive, but because it carried her father's name. Mateo, now 10, had recently won his first baseball game. He kept the trophy on his nightstand next to a drawing of Isabella wearing a cape. He still didn't know what his sister had done. He didn't know about Valentina or Dominic or the network or the FBI. He knew only that his sister was the person who showed up to every game, who helped him with long division, who made him feel safe during thunderstorms. And for Isabella, that was enough. That was everything. Dolores had cut back to 2 shifts. She was sleeping more, smiling more. She had started humming while she cooked, something she hadn't done since Miguel was alive. She still left notes on the kitchen counter every morning, and Isabella still saved every one. The showbox was getting full. She would need a bigger one soon. I want you to think about something for a moment. Think about the people in your life who have been beaten down. Not by fists, necessarily, but by words, by systems, by the slow erosion of being told, over and over, that they don't matter. Think about what it would mean for them to wake up one day with the strength to fight back. Not with violence. Not with revenge. But with clarity. With purpose. With the understanding that protecting the people you love is the most powerful thing a human being can do. That's what this story is about. Not rebirth. Not the supernatural. Not the mafia or the underworld or any of the dramatic machinery that makes a story exciting to tell. At its core, this is a story about a girl who was told she was nothing and who woke up knowing she was everything. And the question I want to leave you with is this. What would you have done in her place? If you woke up tomorrow with the memories of a life lived in the shadows, with the skills to destroy anyone who had ever hurt you, with the knowledge and the connections and the ruthless capability to burn it all down, would you choose revenge? Or would you choose redemption? Would you reach for the gun or for the evidence? Would you build an empire or build a future for a little boy who draws you with a cape? There's no wrong answer. But there is an honest one. And I think, if you sit with it long enough, you'll find that honesty tells you something important about who you are. Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what you think Isabella should have done. Tell me if you've ever been in a situation where you had the power to destroy someone and chose not to. I want to hear your stories. Because every single one of them matters. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, then do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be sitting on their own bedroom floor right now, wondering if the world would notice their absence. Tell them it would. Tell them they matter. Tell them that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is survive long enough to become the person you were always meant to be. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the stories we're bringing you next will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, the most powerful thing in the world isn't a weapon or an empire or a crown. It's a note on a kitchen counter that says, "I love you more than the moon."